We are resuming our study after a gap of a month, and so a quick recollection will be helpful because of the complexity of the text and the passage that we are studying. In the Kena Upanishad, when the gods have won a great victory, they think it is their victory, it is their greatness, and the eternal knew their thought and appeared before them as a formless presence. And immediately there is a great upset, restlessness in the gods because they cannot recognize what is this thing. And successively they send Agni, Vayu and Indra to recognize what this is and inform them. The gods here are the working of the divine powers in us as psychological powers. They also represent at the same time the universal working of these powers in evolution. And so the text is to be understood on both levels. At the level of an individual awakening as we grow and enter in relation with the divine, when we first come in contact with the divine presence, we are unable to know it. And these are the three powers within us that reach out successively to know. The sequence of the three is important. First, it is Agni, which is the builder of forms. It is Agni which creates things which have an origin, a beginning, and an end. All forms grow out of the larger universal material. They grow to become form, and eventually they die because no form which has emerged out of nothingness, which has a birth, can ever survive because everything is growing. When the entire universe is growing, any form which is part of the universe must also grow if it has to stay as part of the universe. But a form, once defined, ceases to grow. or if it changes too much, it is no more what it was. And so as it retains its limited form and the universe moves forward, the form increasingly becomes more and more out of alignment with the all and begins therefore to break down, unable to sustain itself. It shrinks, fades out, breaks down, and its material merges back into the all, which is always moving forward, only to regenerate, reform into a new form which is better aligned with the all. And therefore, we recognize anything which is born has to die, unless it can keep up with the constant forward movement of the divine in evolution. In which case, the form itself is not rigid, it is plastic and continues to grow without limitations, fixity which bind it to the past. Now, Agni is the creator of forms. It is he who presides over all these processes in matter. And when Agni goes forward, that presence asks, "Who are you?" And it says, "I am Agni. I am he that knows all things born." So this is not only Agni as an individual power, but as a cosmic power. He knows all things which are born. And when the gods sent him forward, the gods say to him, "O thou that knowest all things born, learn of this thing, what may be this mighty daemon." And Agni says, "So be it." But when questioned, "Who are you?" he says, "I am he that knows all things born," Agni. Second question is very important. "Since such art thou, what is the force in thee?" It's not enough to know who you are. What is it that distinguishes? What is it, the special power by which you are able to do what you do and be what you are? And then Agni says, "Even all this I could burn, all that is upon the earth." That is the earth here representing the entire material creation. He can burn, meaning he can take any material, recast it. What is the burning process? It breaks up into essential ingredients, reshapes and rearranges, transforms. So Agni not only knows all things which are born, but he also knows how to change them, in a sense destroy them, but to rebuild them in a new form. And so the presence places before him a blade of grass. "This burn." And Agni made towards it with all his speed, but he could not burn it. So the speed here is the full intensity of his movement. There he ceased and turned back. "I could not know of it, what might be this mighty demon." Now, the effort Agni makes is precisely to take the material of form and know the form by breaking it up, by looking at its deeper reality. What is it composed of? So this represents, in our individual first effort to know the divine, our first effort is to know it through form. Now remember, we have to understand this also at a cosmic level in evolution. So in the first emergence in evolution, the power that is driving evolution is seeking to know the divine, is seeking to join with the divine, is seeking to manifest the divine. And the first effort it makes is precisely to catch, to grasp, and to bind into form what it can perceive of the divine. That's how evolution first develops in matter. But it fails. It cannot get that. It gets something which is an approximation. And so it is in us, when we seek to know the divine, we seek to tie him down into form. And so inevitably in our personal journey, we feel the presence. Since we do not know what it is, we give to it a housing, a form, and bind and limit it into the form, the idol. And then we focus on the form. And through the form, we find we can as if get to that which is beyond the form. Except that being our nature, we limit ourselves and often forget that which the form is meant to house. And our focus then tends to reduce to the form itself. In the attempt to know that which is within or beyond the form, we engage with that through exchanges. You offer this, you give this, you take back as prasad. And so the whole exchange is again bound in form. If we set aside this and move a little further, the same form would then be a perception of the divine, which would still be known into or bound into some domain which is our conception of the divine, but a form of conception. But this will be properly the domain of Indra, as we will shortly come to it. Nevertheless, the attempt there also is in the mind to bind into form. And so we give these terms of divine is all good, all bliss, all power, all knowledge, all love, except that he is also the full intensity of the destructive power. He is also all the forms which we see in the universe as evil, hatred, anger, all perversions are also his forms. They do not represent his highest forms, but everything is his forms, ultimately. But we need to bind ourselves to some form which is higher than this confusion that we see through forms. So even in our journey through forms, we are seeking for higher, truer, deeper, more essential, more pure forms. Having made the attempt to decompose through the understanding of forms, Agni fails, comes back. And so the O Vayu, this discern what is this mighty demon, he said, so be it. So Vayu's power here is of discernment, which is not, as was earlier Agni's, knower of things which are born. He is now discerning, not necessarily of things born, but what it is that is greater than the formation. He rushed upon it, that. It said to him, who art thou? I am Vayu, he said. And I am he that expands in the mother of things. So the power of life energy is to expand, to fill all things, to embrace all things. And here is the distinction from form. The form is binding and limiting, but Vayu can enter form, from within grasp, or from outside grasp. He is not bound to the form, he uses forms, but himself is free of forms. And again the second question, which is very important. Since such art thou, what is the force in thee? Even all this I can take for myself, all this that is upon the earth. Take, grasp, embrace. From outside, hold. So I don't have to, unlike Agni, which has to enter in and decompose and look at its constituents, Vayu embraces and from outside can grasp and hold. He does not care what it's made of, he seizes upon it. And in the act of seizing, he knows. And so this is the second effort, when at the level of form we are unable to know and grasp that which is beyond form, we seek to bind ourselves to it or enter in relation with it with our life energies. In the active relationship with the divine, it becomes the relationship of adoration, of love, of seeking, of receiving, of exchanging, and all the pleadings that we make to the divine, give me this or give me that, or build relationships of emotions, are part of this movement. Somehow it is as if we could take the divine into ourselves in an embrace and bind him to us, or give ourselves. In the larger evolutionary movement, when the form emerges, the form by itself is unable to do much, and the life force now begins to awaken in it, infuse itself in it, and animate the form. So the first form that the that emerges in nature is what we would call dead matter, except there's a complex series of elements and complex molecules and all the minerals that we see and the rocks and the beautiful variety of these landscapes. But into them, the life energy comes to give them movement, to awaken in them the capacity to relate to each other, to express what they are inside. Otherwise, in the external form is only a superficial expression, not the full power of what the mineral actually holds within it. And so the animation and the movement of emotion and expression and the interrelations of these, which begin to express, are the second level of evolution, trying then to catch the divine and replicate, represent, manifest him in the world. Life force. That set before him a blade of grass. Take this, because Vayu can take for himself. Take this. He went towards it with all his speed, and he could not take it. Even there he ceased. Even thence he returned. Now this is a very important aspect. They stop at some point because they cannot, and they turned back. Unlike Indra, who does not stop and who does not turn back. These two powers of formation in matter and life energy, when they reach their limit, they exhaust and they fall back. This is the deeper reason why in evolution, life forms always have to die. First is the limitation of Agni itself in forming them. Anything which is born must die. But life energy itself is immortal. Matter itself is immortal. But we don't see it as its obvious character. But life energy is immortality. All life is eternal. And in its own domain, forms are eternal. But when it enters matter, it gets bound in this limitation of material degeneration. But it struggles to manifest its immortality in matter, in living forms, and it fails. And when it fails, it comes back. It then bypasses the limitation of matter, which prevents it to be immortal, by throwing out from itself the seed which becomes the next form, and transfers its energy into the next. So life energy itself, unable to manifest its permanence in form, bypasses that by throwing itself out to take a new form, but the new form emerges from the first. And so we find the life form giving birth to another and another unendingly. Life energy technically, therefore, discovers its immortality through a series of forms. But effectively, it gives up in its attempt to sustain or to materialize the divine, to manifest the divine immortality here in the physical consciousness. They give up and return. In our own quest to know the divine, when we are unable by grasping, we reach out in our call. When unable to hold in our call, we flag, we fall back, tired, until once again our efforts rise. This is the reason why in the spiritual journey, the drive of the desire or the attraction of the divine, which is primarily vital, is not enough to take us through. Even a mental seeking is not enough to take us through, because it gives up, it tires. The seeking in the mind is still the drive of the vital. Something deeper or higher has to awaken, which can then use these drives and which can then sustain. So here, all these efforts fail. They always come back. I could not discern of that. What is this mighty daemon? Then they said to Indra, Master of plenitudes, get thou the knowledge. What is this mighty daemon? He said, so be it. He rushed upon that vanished from before him. Now, in the sequence of the three, recall these three deities are also related among each other. In our study earlier of the Vedic conception of the gods, there is only one divine. Each of these gods is a specialized aspect. All of them are in each other. So when Agni, the effort within us, fails, Vayu emerges, it is as if Agni has built up the base for Vayu's emergence, and Vayu's failure, effort first and failure, builds the base for Indra's emergence. It is in fact secretly one single aspiration and effort to know, using three levels of perception to grasp the divine. The first two fail, the third one also fails, but in a different way. It vanishes from before him, but he does not come back. That vanished from before him. And the next verse, because he continues, he in the same ether, he continues into the higher strata. He in the same ether came upon the woman, even upon her who shines out in many forms, Uma, daughter of the snowy summits. To her he said, what was this mighty demon? So the quest to know does not stop here. But recognizing that within himself there is not the capacity to know, he asks the one who knows. But Indra receives from her the knowledge of who was this. And he receives no. She becomes as if the mediatrix between the divine and the mind. So here we find in the third level of the mind seeking, or the awareness of the mind reaching out, by itself the mind can operate on a lower level and a higher level. If he turns to the lower level, he cannot know. If he turns to the higher level also, it fails. And there is a still higher, almost bordering the limits of the mind, in the ether of the mind's awareness. Reaching that edge, he can still not know by himself, but he can get in touch with the one who knows, and he can ask and receive the knowledge. So here in the evolution we see this journey of our struggle to know the divine. In the larger earth evolution, the journey to realize, to manifest the divine in the world. Even the awakening of the mind can only go so far, but it does not stop. It knows it can get the knowledge, and so it persists. But it is a requirement for the mind to go as if cross beyond its own limitations into the formless ether. And there is the possibility to know through still the mediatrix. So who this is and what this whole portion means, we will now read from the text of Sri Aurobindo's commentary. But keep in mind the three in sequence are one movement working on three different levels of the knowledge, to know as well as to manifest. In our study last time, we read from Sri Aurobindo's commentary on Indra to more deeply understand the nature of this aspect of the divine as the clear illumination, and why he is described as the puissant, the opulent, the power of the mind, and in what way he relates to the forms of life and the life energy itself, and what is the secret of his increase. You will recall the delight in the divine existence through the senses and through our conceptions. It is that which leads to the growth of the clear illumination. And as Indra grows in the illuminated intelligence, he reveals to you even more of the nature of the divine presence. And so it is a growing cycle, each side nourishing the other. So Indra next arises, the puissant, the opulent. Now the word puissant, the power, capital P, opulent with a capital O, Sri Aurobindo uses carefully. The opulence here, if you look at the etymology of the word, It is the sense of plenty, but the root of op is not only plenty, but it is also on the other side the root for opus, which is work, action. So it is the sense of plenty that comes from action, from effort, from work. Opulence is when things grow as a result of an effort. And puissance is the power which fills that effort. Indra is the power of the mind. And this is a power which, as it turns in its intensity, it grows in knowledge. And there are two levels of its operation. So, the senses which the life uses for enjoyment are operations of Indra, which he conducts for knowledge. Things that Agni has upbuilt and supports and destroys in the universe are Indra's field and the subject of his functioning. So, on the lower level of the forms which Agni has built up, it is Indra who is using these forms as his domain of the play. Life energy needs the senses in order to enjoy, and it is this which is an operation of Indra. Indra gives the senses to the life energies so that they may enjoy. Now we see a relationship from Indra with these two. Each time Sri Aurobindo introduces the gods, he describes how they relate to each other. So Agni he described as the power that is the basis of all birth and process in the material universe. All things are his food which he assimilates and turns into material of new birth and formation. When he introduces Vayu, he says, Vayu, the great life principle who moves, breathes, expands infinitely in the mother element, it is he who has brought Agni and placed him secretly in all existence. So the relationship is this: Vayu brought Agni and placed him. Agni created the forms which Vayu then moves into, breathes, expands and plays through. But where did Vayu come? And so Sri Aurobindo explains here. The senses which life uses for enjoyment are operations of Indra. So it is as if Indra has brought Vayu, placed it there and provided him with the means. Vayu brings Agni and makes him work to create the forms. And here in this relationship is the process of the involution. As the divine moves to create the material world, there are successively these three poises. Agni could not be there if Vayu did not place him. Vayu could not be there if Indra did not place him. So there is from top down guidance, from below the formation of material for inhabitation of the higher and the relation with the higher. And that becomes the movement of evolution. There is always this double movement, something descending, involving, hiding, concealing, and then from below emerging, building, revealing. And the relationship between these three has to be seen in this double movement. So if then this unknown existence is something that the senses can grasp, or if it is something that the mind can envisage, Indra shall know it and make it part of his opulent possession. Remember, Indra has two operations. One at the level of the senses, where through the senses he perceives. One at the level of conception of mind, where he conceives and holds as a mental idea. Now, the two are very closely related. The difference is only this, that through the senses you are as if focusing on the form and binding yourself to the physical form. Whereas in the domain of ideas, you're focusing on the thought and making a mental form. The physical form is an attempt to replicate what the mind can conceive. And so whenever Agni is working to create these forms, it is because Indra has already conceived those forms, Vayu has dynamized, and Indra now gives materiality. Indra then, Agni gives materiality. Indra then perceives through the senses. And these forms which Agni has created in the material world are his subject. So when in our consciousness we look out through our senses and look upon all this world and see this world of forms, there are three operations happening. Physically, Agni has built up the forms, energized them by Vayu's working. But within us, there is the energy reaching out to enjoy. And the mind working through that to give the perception, this is flower. Remember the problem of robotics? The light coming into your eyes is only a pattern of colors, dots. What gives you the sense, this is flower. That is the mind's conceptive power that takes this pattern and unites it all into one thing. This is flower, that is leaf, this is plant with 1,000,000 flowers. It is binding it all into a conception. Finally, when you relate to these things, you say flowers, plants, forest, conceptions. So finally, through the senses, it is the mind which is actually giving you the power to enjoy the world and to know it. So that is why Indra is field and subject of his functioning. So if this thing is something which the mind can envisage or the senses grasp, Indra can know it. The point being, ultimately, it is this conceptive power which is Indra, which is fulfilling Vayu and Agni in their lower working. But it is always the conceptive power. If physical form is not that, if life energy cannot grasp that, can you grasp it by the conception of the mind? Unlike physical form, the mind's conceptive forms are not born and therefore do not die. They already exist. What you conceive of, you did not create. You only as if saw what was already there. You have only delineated, created an outline, a form that you can take and say, this is my idea. But the thing itself was always there. We have the sense of discovering, but the sense of discovering, even the word, the etymology of the word is discover. There was a covering, you removed the cover. In all of the mind's creations, we have never the experience that we create, except superficially. There is always the sense of seeing what was already there, discovering what was hidden, or receiving an idea which lights up in your mind. But the birth of the idea was elsewhere, perhaps above the mind, where perhaps it already existed. Conceptions are which can die, they are not a domain of Agni. Agni only gives them material forms. And so, if mind can conceive and seize by conception, if you can reduce the divine to truth, to beauty, to goodness, these are ideas of the mind. And so in the philosophical pursuit, you find this attempt to grasp the reality with ideas, where the physical relation is insufficient, where the devotional quest can take you to a certain point and stops, the mind's conceptive power claims, I should be able to reach it. If then this unknown existence is something that the senses can grasp, or if it is something that the mind can envisage, Indra shall know it and make it part of his opulent possessions. So in the very act of knowing, he adds all that he knows into his treasury. Opulence, remember, the work which leads to the growth. But it is nothing that the senses can grasp or the mind envisage. For as soon as Indra approaches it, it vanishes. Now, this is an experience we have often in our spiritual journey. We have an experience of the divine presence. The moment we try to grasp it, the moment we try to fix it, bind, it somehow slips. You feel this presence, you try to hold it, and it fades out. If you remain passive, receptive, open, it continues. But the moment you try to bind it somehow, it fades out. Equally, if you try to describe it, what was your experience? You try to create words, you try to describe. Yes, you can describe words, you can bring these conceptions. I felt a great peace, felt a great power of something, and so on. But what was it? A presence. I do not know how to describe it. Something fails, or the words are felt to be insufficient. The peace describes its effect on you. The power describes the impact it had on your life energies. But what was it in itself? I don't know, just a presence. I cannot reduce it to form. I cannot describe it through my senses. I cannot reduce it to something that I can hold energetically. It vanishes. And then Sri Aurobindo's commentary now elaborates on what it is that is the limit of mind. The mind can only envisage what is limited by time and space. T capital, S capital. Mind can only envisage what is limited by time and space. In other words, when our mind tries to conceive of something, it has to belong in time. Somewhere in time it has to begin, it has to end, it has to fit inside the extension of time. Or it has to fit inside space. We must be able to say from here to here. Even in the mind's space, it can be an idea or something which limits within time. And this Brahman is that which, as the Rig Veda has said, is neither today nor tomorrow. And though it moves and can be approached in the conscious being of all conscious existences, yet when the mind tries to approach it and study it in itself, it vanishes from the view of the mind. So you can study it because it moves. The presence came, I felt it, it had this effect on me, and then it went. But what was it? You go into it in itself, it vanishes. Now here, neither, when he says neither today nor tomorrow, moves, but you cannot know in itself, immediately we are reminded of something. You will recall in the text of the Isha Upanishad, there is the verse which Sri Aurobindo describes as the verse that teaches us how to conceive of the Brahman. Verse number 5 from the Isha. That moves and that moves not. That is far and the same is near. That is within all this and that also is outside all this. And this is the way the mind can conceive of the Brahman. Of course, you can say everything that I conceive is Brahman, but it is not essentially Brahman. It is forms, ripples, waves, foam, not the ocean itself. How would you know the ocean? And here it teaches us through these three apparently contradictory directions. So Sri Aurobindo suggests this as a theme for meditation. In one of the letters, he is asked by a disciple how to meditate on the divine, how to conceive of the divine. And Sri Aurobindo asks him to read from his own commentary on this verse and says, you read that and use that as your conception of the divine. So we can look at it, the full text of Sri Aurobindo's description the vision of the Brahman. And it's just an elaboration on this verse. The Upanishad teaches us how to perceive Brahman in the universe and in our self-existence. So it is how you will see out there as well as within. It's a long passage, but it's worth reading briefly. We won't elaborate on it, but we have to perceive Brahman comprehensively as both the stable and the moving. We must see it in eternal and immutable spirit, and in all the changing manifestations of universe and relativity. So stable and moving. That moves not. So conceive of everything that is moving, the whole universe that you know of. And at the same time, conceive of that which is permanent, unchanging in all the universe. And you must include both of these. To say only one of them is Brahman is the error. Include both. Second, we have to perceive all things in space and time, the far and the near, the immemorial past, the immediate present, the infinite future, and all their contents and happenings as one Brahman. So when it says that is far and the same is near, the far we tend to think only in space, but it also includes time. What is far in time? This moment is right here and right now. Yesterday is close, but a year ago is far. A year from now is far. 10 centuries from now is far. 10 centuries ago is far. And so extending in space and in time. So that which is at the edge of the visible universe, that which is right here, equally is Brahman. That which was 1,000,000 years ago, that which is now, and 1,000,000 years later, that also is Brahman. So the full scope of space and time, all this is one Brahman. All that they contain, all the things happening, that is far and the same is near. And then third, we have to perceive Brahman as that which exceeds, contains, and supports all individual things, as well as all universe, transcendentally of space and time and causality. We have to perceive it also as that which lives in and possesses the universe and all it contains. So this is the line that is within all this, and that also is outside all this. What does it mean outside? So transcending space, time, and even the causality chain, this causes that. What is without cause, what can express without cause and effect, what is without, beyond time and space, can express in time and space. That exceeds, but it also contains. In exceeding, it embraces all that is in time, space, and causality, and enters inside each thing of time, space, and causality, and supports from within all individual objects and the entire universe at the same time. And the universe, remember, is across time, across space. The moving as well as the stable, immutable. All that is to be seen from outside and from within. It possesses the universe and everything that it contains from inside. At the same time, from outside, transcends and embraces. This, Sri Aurobindo concludes, is the transcendental, universal, and individual Brahman. Lord, continent, and indwelling spirit, which is the object of all knowledge. Consider everything you wish to know. What are you trying to know finally? I want to know how the flower has the color yellow. What are you trying to know finally? What is it? The force of Brahman in flower, in petal, in color, which makes it yellow, which makes it flower, which makes it plant, which makes it grow, which makes it die. Finally, what you're trying to know is the thing which makes it what it is, and it is always Brahman. Even the thing that is, what is inside this box? Is it a flower or is it a stone? Even in wanting to know that, it is finally a Brahman. I want to know myself. I want to know my own capacities, my potential. I want to know who I am. I want to know what is thinking, what is feeling, where did I come from. Finally, all you wish to know is pointing back to Brahman. So he says, Lord, continent and indwelling spirit, which is the object of all knowledge. Its realization is the condition of perfection and the way of immortality. But in all these efforts to know, we are only trying to catch fragmentary appearances of Brahman. The scientist is really seeking Brahman, but in an objectivized way. The psychologist in an introspection is also seeking Brahman, but in a more superficial introspective way. The yogin recognizes both outside and inside. It is Brahman that he seeks, and therefore he goes all the way and can find. And it is this realization of the Brahman itself, in this totality, condition of perfection. If you do not have this as the foundation of your consciousness, you can never be perfect, because you are only a part of that, a microcosm of that. Unless you know that, you can never be truly an expression of that. And the way of immortality, capital I, because that is the immortal knowledge of that, makes you therefore express and experience its immortality, its Satchidananda. So this text of Sri Aurobindo, which he has titled The Vision of the Brahman, is what he recommends also as a theme of meditation. But the whole thing is encapsulated very simply with these key words. That moves not. That is far, and the same is near. That is within all this. That is outside all this. And you can read it in Sanskrit and make it a theme for dwelling in your concentration. But this passage we're reading immediately points us to this. When the mind tries to approach it and study it in itself, it vanishes from the view of the mind. Why? Because the mind can only envisage what is limited by time and space. And this Brahman is that which, as the Rig Veda has said, is neither today nor tomorrow. And though it moves and can be approached in the conscious being of all conscious existences, yet when the mind tries to approach it and study it in itself, it vanishes from the view of the mind, but it is still there. In all conscious existences you can approach it and feel closeness. And then he concludes this with a very brief but comprehensive summary. The omnipresent cannot be seized by the senses. The omniscient cannot be known by the mentality. So these are the two levels of the working of the mind. At the material level, through the senses, you know the divine is everywhere. He is omnipresent. There is nothing where he is not. And though he is in the flower, though he is in the air, he is in the perfume, he is in the light, he is even in the hand which is trying to grasp the flower. You can grasp flower, you can smell the air, you can see the light, but you can never grasp him. Isn't it strange that although he is in all things, and even in all that appears to be nothing, an empty space, you are unable to touch? Isn't that strange? To the physical senses, it feels so unusual. And therefore, it is easy for the physical mind, not the higher conceptive mind, for the physical mind bound only to the senses, to look and say, yes, I see the beauty of nature, but what is this divine presence? I do not know. There is no divine, because everything is changing forms. But if the higher power or higher perception glows through the senses, you see the beauty of the nature and you say, in this beauty I perceive the divine. Through the beauty I have a glimpse of the divine. But what is the divine in itself? I cannot know. And now the conceptive power of the mind steps in and says, the beauty itself is the divine. The fullness and richness of opulence of life is itself the divine. This extraordinary intelligence flow perfectly in alignment with everything else, which makes this life, beauty and harmony possible. That is divine. This power which works intricately through all these things as well as massively in the whole cosmos, that is divine. So you see, the conceptive power of the mind reduces, beginning with the senses or directly. It reduces to these things which are aspects of the divine. But if you ask it, what is this intelligence? What is this power? What is this beauty? Blank. And the philosopher will say, that is beyond our capacity to know. The scientist working on the senses will say that is the domain of philosophy. The philosopher will say that cannot be known. And they will prove to you how it cannot be known because, and so on. So the omnipresent, capital O, cannot be seized by the senses, and yet it can be enjoyed by the senses. The omniscient cannot be known by the mentality. Now here's the interesting thing. Omniscient, he is all-knowing. But our mentality cannot know him. So we recognize immediately our relationship. We are a part of the knowing. We are knowing in our consciousness, and yet we cannot know the all-knowing. And yet we can know that it exists. We can conceive of the all-knowing. In our enjoyment of knowledge, we share in his enjoyment, in his omniscience. But we are the separate piece, the drop in the ocean wandering. It can wander all over the ocean, but it will not know ocean unless it releases itself from its limits and becomes one with the ocean. And so with the senses, the omnipresent cannot be known, cannot be perceived or grasped as long as you bind yourself into the senses. But if you release from the senses, you have a sense of ceasing or becoming one with him. So at this point, Sri Aurobindo takes up the passage that links with the source of the knowledge, Uma Haimavati, who reveals to Indra who is this divine presence. Remember, in the text itself, he in the same ether came upon the woman. So when he approaches the divine, he vanishes. But what is it that is there when the divine vanishes? Emptiness. In our mind's conception, we go beyond. What is this intelligence? What is this power? What is this beauty? Blank. The mind is as if stunned. No conceptive power can go beyond this. And in this blankness of the mind, he meets her. But Indra does not turn back from the quest like Agni and Vayu. He pursues his way through the highest ether of the pure mentality. And this is where the mind is pure, essential, bare in its awareness. He pursues his way. And so in the meditation, as we dwell on this conception of Brahman, we may start even with our senses and conceive of all these three different aspects of Brahman. And after a while, the forms fade. And the mind dwells on the pure idea of this timeless and time, spaceless and space, infinite and formed, far and near, moving, unmoving, within and beyond. And we dwell in pure conception, and after a while even the conception becomes quiet. This pure awareness, presence. He pursues his way through the highest ether of the pure mentality, and there he approaches the woman, capital W. The many shining Uma Haimavati. So we will look at the term in detail next time from the Vedic commentary of Sri Aurobindo. From her, he learns that this demon is the Brahman, by whom alone the gods of mind and life and body conquer and affirm themselves, and in whom alone they are great. And now Sri Aurobindo explains, who is this Uma? Uma is the supreme nature from whom the whole cosmic action takes its birth. Now this is the poise from which the whole movement of a manifestation emerges. Birth, and therefore mother. She is the mother who gives birth to all this. But not nature as we see it here. It is not even higher nature, it is supreme nature, the peak, the highest poise of that which we know as nature, from whom the whole cosmic action takes its birth. She is the pure summit and highest power of the One who here shines out in many forms. From this supreme nature, which is also supreme consciousness, the gods must learn their own truth. They must proceed by reflecting it in themselves instead of limiting themselves to their own lower movement. So when the mind comes to this poise, beyond even its power of conception, in the stillness and silence, often what happens to people is, oh, my mind is going blank. And immediately you try to grasp and bring it into activity. Instead you let go and let the mind turn to reflect that which is beyond. And with the conception of this highest supreme consciousness, which is the creative source, power of the One, we turn to that. And in giving themselves, they learn. So when the mind gives itself, through reflection, it learns of the One, of the Divine. But remember, the mind is the peak point of the life energy which was struggling, which is the peak point of the formative power of Agni. So it is as if all the gods have put forward these three as their representatives to know the Divine. So all the workings of the forces and powers in us, first through Agni, then Vayu, then Indra, and at last something in our consciousness touches, reflects. In the mind's awareness, there is the perception of the Divine Presence. And from there it settles in our life energies, which begin to feel the presence. From there it settles into a physical consciousness and forms. And all the other powers, the gods in us, receive thus. By becoming completely still, to receive by reflection. So they must proceed by reflecting it in themselves instead of limiting themselves to their own lower movement. So what was the earlier movement of the gods? We have a victory, we have achieved, we are great, we have grown. So the push was from their own effort, which is the first movement of evolution, the struggle to grow. At some point when it reaches a limit, the Divine Presence comes before you to awaken you to something greater. But at that point you cannot grow into that by seizing upon it. You have to learn to let go and reflect that. And in the reflection, the action of the Divine in us fills the action of the gods, makes them complete, makes them perfect. For she has the knowledge and consciousness of the One, while the lower nature of mind, life and body can only envisage the many. So it's as if in our highest poise, in our nature, we can perceive the One, but in the lower it is mostly the consciousness of the multiplicity, and these two are linked here. Again we are reminded of the similarity with the Isha Upanishad text. I'll just read quickly so that we complete this idea. Although, therefore, Indra, Vayu and Agni are the greatest of the gods, the first coming to know the existence of the Brahman, the others approaching and feeling the touch of it, yet it is only by entering into contact with the Supreme Consciousness and reflecting its nature, and by the elimination of the vital, mental, physical egoism, so that the whole function shall be to reflect the One and Supreme, that Brahman can be known by the gods in us and possessed. So this poise of coming to the reflecting without separation, without the I limiting sense, then we can know and allow it to enter and for us to possess by reflecting, by receiving. The conscious force that supports our embodied life must become simply and purely a reflector of the Supreme Consciousness and power. The life must become passively potent reflection, pure image in life. The mind must resign itself to be no more than a faithful mirror. By this conscious surrender of mind, life, and senses to the master of our senses, life and mind who alone really govern their action by their turning of cosmic consciousness reflection, we can faithfully reproduce the nature of the eternal, and we may hope to know and through knowledge rise into that. This is the sequence of the thought now. So this last step, where Indra turns to her and says, "Who is this?" She said to him, "It is the eternal. Of the eternal is this victory in which you shall grow to greatness." So the verse describes it like this. That is the eternal. You thought it was your victory, it is actually his victory. But it is in this victory which will lead you into your own greatness. So our human effort and larger cosmic evolution has brought us to a certain point beyond which we are unable to go. In order to complete that evolution is this requirement, to know and to receive by a passive reflection the eternal, that he may then fill you and work in you and complete what you are unable to do. It is he filling the gods in us which will make them complete. So we will pause here and dwell on this idea. You see how at the same time this describes not only the working of cosmic evolution, not only the awakening of a human being to a higher consciousness, but it has a profound yogic content of how it is that we can know and enter in relation to the divine most completely in mind, life, and body. And the result of that will be the further verses which will describe how that transforms our whole being and our whole consciousness. Last time, I wanted to share this as an interesting aside. We had read in detail the text from Sri Aurobindo on Indra from The Secret of the Veda. And Indra, as you know, in his physical action is represented by the working of the thunder and the lightning. And we had finished our class, I think, around 7:30. Within a few hours, the sky was cloudy. And then from 10:30 to 11:30, there was sustained lightning and thunder. It was very unusual. The light was flashing. It was not one bright flash. It was a series of continuing flashes, just going on constantly, not stopping even for a moment, for 1 hour. Yes. I noted it from about 10:30 to 11:30. Continuous flashing and rumbling of the thunder. At first I thought it was noise of some machine. It was so constant. But that kind of constancy we have never seen. But many times we have seen this, that when we read from Sri Aurobindo's text describing the Vedic deities, there is often a very clear manifestation of their presence in some such form. And if we take that principle, in the very act of reading this and dwelling upon the concept of the Brahman, it helps something within us to open, to perceive, and to receive, even as a first glimpse, the divine presence. And that is why this study is so valuable in our sadhana. We can meditate on this briefly.